everyone. Thank you for attending. This is our first Gather to Grow webinar series, so thank you for joining. The goal of this webinar series is to share knowledge and training and workshops, create opportunities for others to learn, uplift each other's work, and support Indigenous farmers by engaging in the full process of seed and food sovereignty. These gatherings are meant to connect with local BIPOC communities, highlight best practices, and create spaces of healing by healed people for community growth and resilience. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Mary Oxendine. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. If you want to put your name and where you're coming in from in the chat, and if you are repping an organization, feel free to add that too. Today we're going to be talking about financial storytelling and Indigenous perspective of financial stewardship. So, yeah, just really quickly, a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Mary Oxendine. I am Tuscarora. Um, I am coming to you as a cultivator of Indigenous foods, a, a daughter, an auntie, a friend, and someone who works at the intersection of food and finance. Um, yeah, I will share with you today what I know and things that I have learned, but would love to hear from you all, and know that you all have wisdom to offer and experiences to share. So definitely want to make space for folks to share who are bringing their own wisdom and experiences in the room. Um, I do want to let you know that for today, if you can put questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, there should be, actually, I don't know if is there a Q&A function, Maria, or is it just the chat?
Yes, there is. There's a
There.
Q&A function, but for some reason, if you guys can't get that to work, we will catch your questions in the chat.
Oh, yep. And I think those are the things that I needed to say about that. Yeah, so just before we get started, just taking a moment to, yeah, just start the session with some gratitude, thinking about, the people that are in this space, and think I'm really grateful for you all and the work that you all are doing in each of your communities, and being able to be in relationship with the plants and animals, and particularly the plants that we are stewarding as farmers or growers or seed keepers. It's raining where I am today, so just really grateful for the rain, and the thunder beings for their blessing. So we are going to talk about some financial literacy. Before we do that, I wanted to start with a somatic exercise. I know that talking about money and finances can be stressful or anxiety producing for some folks. So I wanted to take a moment to just ground ourselves, regulate our nervous system before we start talking about money. And then after we spend some time talking about financial literacy from personal finances as well as farm finances, we'll talk about some diversified funding options and things that you should consider for that. I do want to note that we're just going to pretty much kind of scratch the surface in thinking about financial literacy today. Uh, there will be additional webinars. I think there's a webinar in June that will kind of talk about how to start a business. So there'll be additional sessions, and I'll have some resources in these slides, if folks are interested in additional information. So let's get into our somatic exercise. So what I wanted to do today, it's called emotional freedom technique. Basically, it's a tapping exercise, and I'll show you what we're going to do, and then we'll actually do it together. So first, we'll tap underneath our right pinky, and then we would tap under our left pinky and tap in between our eyebrows. on the sides of our eyes, on the temple where that bone is, underneath your eyes, underneath your chin. I mean, sorry, underneath your nose, on your chin, on your collarbone. And it's hard to see this on Zoom, but I'm tapping underneath my armpit. And then we'll finish by tapping on our head. Um, so this is really to support folks in relieving symptoms of anxiety and depression and stress. Um, so as we're doing this, let's first take a couple of minutes. And I invite you to close your eyes or to keep them open, whichever feels more comfortable for you all. And let's take one more deep breath. And I know that there's a lot going on in the world and in our daily lives. So think about what you might be feeling right now, what emotions might be coming up for you. You might say, I feel anxious or I feel worried. And so as we're sharing space and doing this tapping exercise, um, think about that and tell yourself, I feel whatever the emotion is, and I'm open to letting that go. I am coming here with an open heart and an open mind, and I'm willing to let whatever negative emotions I might be holding, I'm willing to let those go. And taking one more deep breath, tap underneath your right pinky, underneath your left pinky, in between your eyebrows, beside your eyes, under your nose, under your chin, on your collarbone, underneath your armpit, and on top of your hip. And you can stop tapping. Maybe take one more deep breath. And you can open your eyes if you had your eyes closed, and maybe come back into the space. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly give a disclaimer. I am not an accountant. So please don't consider this like, professional advice from an accountant. The presentation and the slides today are for educational purposes only. If you do need, support for like something specific or, just need some additional support, I would definitely suggest kind of seeking out a professional accountant to support you. But so we are going to be talking about, again, personal and farm financial literacy. But first, we're going to talk about personal. But before we get into the financial literacy part, just wanted to kind of like conceptualize one way of thinking about budgeting. And so, as Native people, we are storytellers. We use different mediums or means of telling stories. And I've just included a couple of examples here. So, for example, like the Haudenosaunee people use wampum a lot. I'm sorry, I'm going to move my water over. Use wampum belts a lot to tell stories. We're using those shells and converting them to beadwork to be able to tell different stories or be able to document different agreements that have happened. Um, and similarly, the Lumbee tribe have the pine cone patchwork, where they're telling a story of the land where they live and honoring the longleaf pine with that fabric and that pattern that they've created. And so, in a similar vein, we can think about a budget as a way of telling a story. Thinking about using numbers as a way to demonstrate like what are our values, what are our goals, and where we want to be going. And so in that way, like maybe it kind of demystifies or creates less anxiety around the idea of budgeting and what that means. Um, and so a budget can also be helpful in thinking through um, financial problems and figuring out how to solve those. But it essentially is a way for us to be able to think about our choices of spending and saving and how we're using that to meet our financial goals. So, starting with our personal finances, I think it's really important to start with your personal finances because I think it's much easier to um, start here before kind of diving into the really complex budgeting of maybe a farm business and different cash flows and balance statements and all those things. Also, you can get a lot more comfortable with your finances, and that'll make it a lot easier for you to be able to articulate that to like a lender or a grantor. Even if you don't have a farm business, if you're applying for grants for, to expand your garden or to work with community, most of the times they want you to be able to create some kind of budget. And so if you have been working through your own personal finances with a budget, then that's a lot easier to be able to kind of create something to be able to share um, with that. And I just wanted to say, like, again, kind of going with that narrative of storytelling, you know, so I I'm a gardener. I guess consider myself a beginner farmer and thinking about how I set up my own sort of like business to bring in income. I because of my own personal values and some may have similar values, I don't sell the seed that I use, our traditional indigenous seeds. I don't sell them. I'm not charging folks for charging community members for teaching them how to grow things, but I do grow herbs that I can dry for teas or culinary spices and sell those. And so it's, thinking about how you're setting up your finances or your business really does demonstrate sort of where your values are and kind of can be a way to tell that story of your own value set. So I wanted to talk through this example, personal monthly budget. And Maria, if you can put the link to this in the chat. So there's a link to this online. And actually, I'm going to share my screen that has this on here too. So I wanted to share this particular budget just to give you all an example of what a budget can look like. But before we get started on looking at this, I'm curious if folks could drop in the chat, like what are some example, like maybe budget goals that you all are excited about, like things that you want to work towards, like maybe you want to buy a new tiller or you just want to expand your garden and so you need some soil or you if there are different financial goals that you all have that you'd want to work towards and thinking about maybe budgeting for, if you could drop those in the chat. Okay, sweet. Thanks, Mac. So Mac is interested in a greenhouse. Saving up to start a farm. Yeah, I feel you. A proposal specialist for your business, buying compost. Yeah, these are all really cool things, really cool goals. Pay a person beyond a living wage. Yes, that's amazing. I love that. So this is, yeah, these are great goals. Um, yeah, so I think so thinking about water catchment system, yeah, those are really cool. I'm definitely interested in that. So yeah, I really like this template in particular as a personal monthly budget template because of a few things. So it does have this income category here at the top left. You can put your salary, different refunds or reimbursements, business, pension, different kind of income categories that you have. There's also a savings section. You can include things, savings that you have for an emergency fund, which we'll talk about in a little bit, like savings for retirement or education. Um, we'll come back to this budget summary section. And then it also has like lots of different expenses listed by categories. So like you can thinking through like whatever expenses you have for your home or transportation. They have this section called daily living, entertainment, health, and like vacation and holiday. And I like that you can add in different things here. And I'm just going to put in some like random numbers. And it will like add the section for you. You can also, it also has columns for projected uh, expenses or income and versus actual. So we're at the end of May, and so this would be a perfect time to start a budget for June. So to kind of play around with this a little bit. For example, like maybe in June, I know that my monthly rent is usually, and again, I'm just going to put in some numbers here. Maybe I know my rent is around $600. I think I'm going to spend $50 in gas. So you can kind of go through and estimate what you think your expenses are going to be and what you think like maybe your salary would be or your pension or how much you might want to save for like an emergency fund. And so you can see as I'm just like typing in numbers here, for the income, it has a total for that section. The savings has a total. And I told you that we would come back to this budget summary section. So for the projected that we put in, it's added up our two different income categories and it's added up our expenses. And so you can see that, net is projected that we would have $1,260 left over at the end of the month. And the thing that I really like about having the two columns is, sometimes what we think is going to happen doesn't actually happen. So as you're going through the month, you can go in and put in like, oh, I actually got like a little bonus. And so my salary was like $2,200. Or actually, my rent went up, and so it ended up being $630 rather than $600. Or before, when I had put $50 here for water, maybe I only spent like $40 in water. Or oh wow, I kind of went overboard with the gardening and spent $120 rather than the 90 that I thought I was going to spend. See, then you can kind of again go back to this budget summary over here and it shows you your total income, your total expenses, um, and then what the net has been. And so this is editable. Like once you download this, you can basically the link that Maria put in the chat, you'll need to like copy that to create a version for your own Google Drive. But you could go in and let's just say maybe I don't have a car because I live in a city and I take public transportation. Like you could delete some of these things and put in other categories. So like maybe I wouldn't have a car payment, but I would have more for public transportation. Or maybe I don't have gas or, like as far I think this gas up here is actually for like maybe for like a gas stove or something like that. And then the transportation, your actual fuel for your vehicle is down here. But like, so maybe my home doesn't have gas in it, and so I wouldn't have that expense up here. So this is just a really good example of like what a simple budget could look like, and something that folks can get started on today if you download this and you're able to play around with it. I'm going to go back to our slides. Sorry, I'm just going to look at my notes to see if I missed anything. Okay. So the things that I've already talked about some benefits of budgeting, but I just wanted to note that um, it's really helpful to budget so that you can really see how you're spending your money so that you can notice patterns in spending. I think that's the one of the most helpful things is being able to see, we looked at a monthly budget, but ideally, folks would do this over time, and then you'd be able to get in the habit of saying like, okay, each month I usually spend X amount on this, or I know in this category I tend to go over. So maybe I need to adjust either adjust what the projection is, or maybe kind of look into like why I'm spending so much in that particular category if I don't want to spend that much. So, which kind of gets to the next point of like seeing those patterns will help you adjust your habits so that they align more with your goals, priorities, and needs. So if you're like, oh, I love gardening and I really want to be able to expand my garden, maybe I spend more or spend less, sorry, on eating out, and so that I can spend more on my garden project. And then, as you're changing your habits, that will your spending will better align with your long-term financial goals, which is again kind of going back to that storytelling of like what are we putting value and meaning on, and like help the budget will help you show or help show you like what you're spending things on so that you can really be able to spend on the things that you value the most and be able to meet those long-term financial goals that you have. And also, having a budget does can help with navigating financial challenges, or at least be able to kind of like move things around on that spreadsheet to be able to figure out how do we create how do we create like the best situation possible? I know that we don't necessarily always have the money that we need to get all the things. So how do we do that? Again, coming from our values. So one of those is just like leaning on each other. So thinking about, how do we care for each other? How are we sharing what we do have? And maybe like bartering with other people, like just kind of trading things. Like um, maybe I have some collards that I've grown and my neighbor has some eggs and we can trade. So helping each other with things like that. Also, engaging in more traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering can really help reduce your grocery budget so that maybe you can then spend those funds on something else that you might need to spend things on. And then also having a budget is really good for anticipating or at least being able to adjust for those unexpected expenses. So, maybe I got a flat tire and I need to get a new tire. So maybe I can reduce something in one category that maybe I had projected I was going to buy X, Y, or Z this month, but maybe I can delay that so that I can fix that tire. And I can be able to see that in the budget and know that I have other things taken care of. And then the last thing is really building an emergency savings so that you do have more, so that you're better prepared for those unexpected expenses. And so you'll be able to see in your budget, I could save maybe $50 or $100 or whatever it is to kind of start building up that emergency savings. Um, so that, if you have, um, an unexpected job loss or you get hurt and you can't work or something like that, then you're able to be able to have that as a backup. And so thinking about savings, just really quickly kind of going through like a potential like savings plan scenario, but basically having a savings plan is sort of what we just talked about, but like being able to set aside money for the future to pay for something that you need or a goal that you have. So, some of the goals that you mentioned earlier were, for example, the greenhouse. So, thinking about like how much does a greenhouse cost? What's my goal for getting the greenhouse? So, like, what's that time frame? And then how much would I need to save each month to get that greenhouse? And that could include like purchasing some supplies. The it could be a combination of like having some friends help you. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like find money to like pay for all the things, but just figuring out what is that financial goal. So the example that I have on here is just maybe you need a tiller. Yours broke, or you are starting that new farm and you don't have one and you don't have any friends that you could borrow one from. So I just put, for example, like $1,200, and I want to be able to get that in a year from now in 12 months. So that basically would mean I need to save $100 a month in order to buy that. So then you would build that into your budget, and be able to put that in your savings account. So thinking about savings, I just wanted to note that a high yield savings account is something that folks might want to look into. Um, it does give you more, it gives you the ability to access your funds quickly, similar to a regular savings account, but it gives you a higher interest rate. So you're earning a little bit more on your money than you would in a regular savings account. I just have a couple examples on here of Synchrony Bank and Ally Bank. But you want to look for a high yield savings account that has no minimum balance, and charges no fees. You want to look for something that doesn't require deposits. It's insured by the FDIC, and you can easily transfer funds to and from your bank account. A lot of the high yield savings accounts are online banks. Um, and so they're able to offer higher interest rates than like maybe the brick and mortar banks that you would normally go to. So, okay. Um, so I think we are going to shift in just a second. But before we start talking about farm operating budgets, I wanted to give folks a chance to kind of go back to that budget that we were looking at. Are there things in this budget for the folks that use a budget on a regular basis that you all liked or didn't like? Any categories that you or uh, any categories that you use in your budget that aren't included in here, or any kind of like tips and tricks that you want to share with folks before we move to like farm finance? And it's okay if folks don't want to share right now either too. We can keep going. So, we started with personal budgeting. And for the folks that are kind of moving into, um, as being a beginner farmer or grower, you might want to start thinking about your farm budget. And so we're going to use this resource that's linked in here. We will share out the slides after the presentation. And so all the resources that are linked in here, you'll be able to access them. But so in order to talk about the farm budget, I wanted to share this table that was in the resource that was linked on the previous slide. So this is a sort of a make-believe farm, Big Beat Farm, but it is based on a real farm. And so this is their cash flow or their farm operating budget. And you can see that it is organized by month. So they are looking at it monthly, but it's also totaled across the whole year. And at the top is sort of where their income is, so their operating receipts and cash flow. And then the bottom part is where they've put their operating expenses and cash outflows. So basically what their expenses were for each month. The thing that I want to note is that at this last row here at the bottom, this cash balance, in some months the numbers are negative and some months the numbers are positive. In the end, at the end of the year, they do end up with a positive cash balance. So the amount of money that they make for their income is more than their expenses. So that's good at the end of the year. But for each of these months that have a negative balance, this is the reason why we want to look at a farm operating budget for the whole entire year. It sounds crazy to have like a personal budget where it's like negative multiple months a year, but that may be true if you have a business entity where there are certain months where you get paid a lot more than other months. And that may be true for farming, but particularly because, like you're planting up front and then you're harvesting and able to potentially sell some of the things that you're harvesting. So this particular business, you'll notice up here that they get most of their income in like one big lump sum in April from the CSA program that they have. And so that's why the month of April they have a lot more income than the other months. The thing to note is or the thing that farmers will want to keep in mind is or questions is how am I going to be able to pay the expenses that I have in the months where I'm not getting that much money? Will the amount that you have at the end of the year that can kind of flow into the next year be enough to cover those? Will you be able to get one lump sum or one amount that will be able to cover it? Will you need a line of credit? So thinking like as you're creating a business budget over the year, um, pre-planning what your strategy will be for the months that you may not be making that much money to make sure that you're able to cover your expenses. So we're in this webinar, we're not necessarily going to dig deep into like how to create this, but that resource that I had on the previous slide will walk you through like how you can actually create this table. Um, but I wanted to show this as an example of like what your kind of high level business operating budget might look like. I did want to talk about a couple things as it relates to this. So thinking about this 1189, well, actually, before I get to that, so yeah, I did have a couple notes about creating this. We're not necessarily digging deep down into it, but I did have a couple notes that I wanted to share. So for folks that have already been farming for a couple years and you have those sales receipts, like a sales log, or you've already documented expenses that you have, like you have receipts from those. Um, Sorry, there's this little gnat that keeps flying in my face. Um, we, you would be able to use those receipts and those sales logs to be able to see like, okay, from last year, I can use that to know an estimate of what my income will be using those sales logs. And you would be able to use those receipts from the expenses to be able to create like an estimate that projected of what your expenses would be throughout the year. And then you can use that to make any adjustments that you have planned for the upcoming year. And so that would be able to be a good starting place to create an operating budget. for folks that are newer that don't have those receipts or sales logs, um, it's going to be a little bit harder, but it is a really good practice to be able to create a tentative operating budget as a beginner farmer so that you know how much you should set your price at. I think that's the most important. Uh, Folks tend to maybe price things as far as like what they think people will pay, price things as far as maybe like what they see other people charging. But you really need to think about what is your income goal for your business, what you think your expected expenses will be. So like what are the specific expenses that you will particularly incur? So is that I'll just use myself as an example, like thinking about creating tea blends. Maybe you want to use a dehydrator or you need packaging for the teas. Um, maybe you need resources to be able to market your product. So maybe, it's either maybe you want to print some yard signs or flyers or pay someone to do some social media post for you. So thinking about like what are the different things that you might incur as far as your expenses as a farmer. And so you have your income goal, you have your potential expenses, and then that will help inform what you need to sell your products at. So what your price point will be, and then that can also inform like what markets you might want to pursue. So if you know you need to charge X amount, maybe you would be best fit to sell at X, Y, or Z markets or like this would be the type of customer that you might want to seek out. So just these are some questions to kind of start thinking about as you're building out an operating budget. And once you've been doing things and you have some profit, you can do lots of different things with the profit that you're making. Again, just keeping in mind that a buffer of cash in your farm checking account can help with those unexpected expenses. But some things that I just wanted to mention was potentially like reinvesting back into the farm. So like getting that equipment that you might need or building any kind of infrastructure. A lot of times farmers don't think about paying themselves, but that's really important to make sure that you are taking care of your needs and your family's needs. So maybe thinking about taking an owner's draw so that you can have that as part of your household income. And then maybe considering creating a reserve account. This is kind of like a savings account for a business, I guess, but thinking about any future investments that you might want to make, like if you're trying to buy land uh, to start a new farm or expand your farm or um, whatever kind of investment that you might be interested in making would be good for a reserve account. And if you are really interested in digging super deep into farm finances, there are a couple resources that I put on this slide. Um, all three of these have lots of different resources that are on those websites that go much deeper into finance, tax, different asset protection, working through the nitty-gritty of farm financing. So I'm going to pause before we go to the next section to see if folks have any questions, if folks have any, you know, wisdom that they want to share from their own experiences or things that they've learned. Feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can take you off mute. And I'm just looking at the chat now. I wasn't seeing. And I'll share the slide so you'll have all the links and everything. And thanks, Marcy. You put the labor plays a big part in the success of the farm when it comes to harvest and to process. The harvest is a very big process. Yeah, I think at that big beet farm, they didn't have any labor at the time, but you're exactly right that labor would be a big cost. So definitely if you have folks that are working on your farm, you should include that. Or again, like I was saying, like taking like a owner's draw because you are working on the farm, so making sure that you're paying yourself is really important. And even if you have family members that are helping you, I would say make sure that you're including that in your budget to be able to have, funding to pay them. I've definitely seen folks where they're asking family members to kind of volunteer their time, and maybe that is okay temporarily, but it it tends not to work out in the long run. So just kind of thinking about that on the front end. Yeah, don't forget to pay yourself. Okay, we can go to the next section. So yeah, so this section is really focused on diversified funding options. I will say I am not encouraging folks to seek out federal funding at this time because the funding programs are changing a whole lot. And it's hard to know which programs are actually, um, moving forward or not. So I am not necessarily including any federal grant programs or loans on here. Those do exist, and I'm not necessarily saying that you shouldn't know about them, but I'm just not kind of directing people towards that right now, just because there's so much unknown. Um, so I just wanted to kind of preface this section by saying that. So we just talked about, your budget and sales that you're making from farms or from your gardening operation. Um, and so you will have sales and funding coming in that way, but there's a lot of other opportunities to seek out funding that could help you like get the materials that you need or be able to expand, to be able to like grow and be able to reach more people or grow more things. So grants are a great way to be able to expand what you're doing. They are taxable. Just wanted to make sure people know that if you are a if you're not a 501c3, if you're a 501c3, this, um, but I just wanted to let, because a lot of farms that I know are LLCs, and so I just wanted to note that if you are LLC, the grants are taxable, but you don't have to pay them back. Um, so it's kind of like free money, so to speak. And there's also recoverable grants. So basically, it's almost kind of like a 0% interest loan. And a lot of times you don't, basically it's a grant that you do pay back. So that's why I'm saying it's kind of like a 0% interest loan. But sometimes they have stipulations where you only pay it back if certain goals are met. So if, you said if we made X, Y, or Z amount of money, then we would pay this grant back. And if you don't reach that, then you don't have to pay it back. So there are definitely terms that you would want to consider when exploring that as an option. And also loans are an option. If you think that is something that you're interested in, you do have to pay that back according to the terms that are set up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And there's usually interest that you would have to pay. And then the last part, this isn't necessarily direct money, but I did want to include it in here because I do think that it's something that's really helpful is financial technical assistance. So maybe it's not directly money to your organization or to your business, but it could really help you make sure that your business is successful, which I think is really helpful. And so I wanted to include that as a funding option. And so I wanted to include a little bit more about what loan options are available for folks and things to consider as you're thinking through loans. I know getting a bank loan can be challenging, and I wanted to let folks know that there are other options out there. And there's some terms that, maybe some folks have kind of used that are confusing. And so I wanted to include some of those on here. But organizations that say that they have reparative capital, really, it's basically just focus on setting up the loan in a way that's beneficial to the farmer or grower, and not so much focused on the investor. So how the terms are set up, what the interest rate is, really thinking about how the funding is helping farmers and growers. It's not so much about making the investors a lot of money. Impact investors, they're they're focused on not just having like a return on their finances, um, but they are also interested in other returns, like maybe a social return or ecological return. So like maybe they really are looking at like how your farm might be supporting the environment in your area, or how your farm might be like building community, in addition to, them getting their money back from the loan. And then the integrated capital is really about thinking about what are the combination of financial capital, so essentially money and like non-financial resources. So, are there ways that the organization can not only just provide a loan, but also support your business in other ways, like whether it's like business coaching or that financial technical assistance that I mentioned. So those are a few different kind of terms that are thrown around in sort of like non-bank loan world. Um, and then also just thinking about what the loan interest rate is. I know that 3% is really low, but there are some organizations that do give 3% interest. So thinking about how you can get like a lower interest rate, because that makes a big difference as to how much you're paying back. Really negotiating on the finance terms. So there are organizations that could give you, a longer payback period. So maybe like a 7 to 10 year payback period, or, terms where you don't make any payments for a certain number of months, or you're maybe making interest only payments for a certain amount of time before the full payment starts. I know having a loan with no collateral is really important for folks that are living on trust land or like farming on trust land. And then particularly if you have a business that's, been going for a while and you've been making money, like you may be able to get financing based on like your revenue. So basically like the how much you pay back is dependent upon how much your business is making each month, so that the payments um aren't too burdensome, and we know that you can pay them back within the time frame allotted. And also, I just wanted to note, like, there are a lot of organizations that are trying to do more, I guess, what we call like character-based lending. So they really want to get to know you as a person and not just focus on your credit score. So I would really recommend, reaching out to an organization like that. And I do have some examples on a in a slide of that. And the last couple, I guess, loan considerations is just, some things to ask yourself. Will you be able to pay back the funds within the required time frame, based on what the terms are? And if will paying those funds back create a hardship for you and your family? And then the last one, I really do consider, having a lender borrower agreement as a relationship. This is an agreement that you'll have for a while. And if they really are trying to get to know you as a person and not just base it off your credit, it really does feel like a relationship. So is this lender someone that you could be in a relationship with for a long term? So there's this is not an exhaustive list, but I did list some funding opportunities on here as a place to start. Um, for the organizations that give grants, I do recommend that you sign up for their newsletters to hear about the grants as soon as they open. We are here with NAFSA, so Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance does have grants, but there's First Nations Development Institute, Indian Collective, Newman's Own Foundation, Decolonizing Wealth Fund, W.K. Kellogg Foundation. They all have grants that are focused on Indigenous food sovereignty and supporting Native communities and growing. Um, there's also a lot of Native CDFIs or community development finance institutions. I just have some examples on here. There's a lot more than what I've listed. OISTA is a national one. A lot of them do serve like a regional area. So I tried to put on here which regions or which areas the other ones serve, but just wanted to know that there's a lot of native CDFIs. So there may be one in your area that you could access and just some continuing opportunities. So also Indian Collective has loans, a keep ton, Native Community Capital, Foodshed Capital, Potlikker Capital, and then the Equitable Food Oriented Development Fund. The last three don't just give loans to Native organizations or Native businesses, but they do particularly focus on BIPOC communities. Um, and then I did have a few more like regional, such like uh, local options. Again, these are just examples. There's probably, well, not probably, but there's a lot more organizations out there that are like more regional and local. So, but these are just some examples to get started with. Any questions that folks have, or again, like wisdom or experience that you want to share with the group? You feel free to put it in the chat, or you can take yourself or raise your hand and we'll take you off mute. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Thank you, Mary, so much. This was so informative. Um, we dropped in the chat with the next save the date for the restoration for the next webinar. So feel free to click that link and register for the next one in June. And that is all. Thank you guys so much for attending. It was an outstanding attendance, and the engagement was amazing, better than we could have expected. And it was our first webinar. So stay tuned for future ones. And thank you again, Mary, for your time.
Artlist.io